The Pit Press Podcast.
Reinholz launches from downtown. No. Van Horn, no. And that's it. New Mexico wins it.
Kenny Thomas blocks. Gibson hustling down. He has some room. And he gets it. Oh, long three. He got it.
Oh, my goodness. Kendall Williams from 35 feet. For the win. Snell. Got it. He got it. Wow. With 1.8 seconds remaining.
And New Mexico's going to dribble out the clock. The Lobos three-peat as conference tournament champions. Kendall Williams fires the ball into the air.
In 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back to another episode of the Pit Press Podcast. My name is Ryan Tamori, and I'm flying solo on this episode. No Ed Nunez, no Rick Thompson, no Jacob Neff, no usual suspects. I'm very privileged to have this gentleman on. I admire any journalist, especially one that's a sports journalist. I did it. I don't do it full time anymore, but I like to say that they're my people, and quite a distinguished guest. He's a sports reporter for the Wall Street Journal. He's based in New York. He joined the Journal sports department in 2011, and since then has covered events like the World Series, Super Bowls, NBA Finals, Final Fours, college football national championship games, and much more. I believe you're also a teacher at Manhattan College. He is also the author of the book Swing Kings, the Inside Story of Baseball's Home Run Revolution. I'm now picking up a copy of that. That was published in 2020. His name is Jared Diamond. Sir, how are you doing? And by the way, what a great name.
Yes, I was born to be a baseball writer. I was a full-time baseball writer for over 10 years before branching on to some other things. And I think that was the job I was clearly born to do with this name.
Who'd you write for and who'd you cover?
I've been at the Journal for my whole career, 13 years, but I was the Journal's primary baseball writer for most of my time at the Journal. I got off the baseball beat in 2022. I had some kids, couldn't do the nights and the traveling anymore after my kids were born. So I handed over the baseball beat, and now I'm on the, the enterprise investigation / sports gambling beat, which has been quite interesting after, a decade plus of nothing but baseball.
I would imagine so. My dream job would have been to cover college football nationally or do baseball nationally. So very, very jealous. Your story came out, the continuity of the podcast, I kind of throw it out the window. We're recording this on a Thursday night. Your story came out in the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday. The college football game that mystified Vegas. I love this headline, this deck. A surge of suspicious bets came in for UNLV to defeat UNM or New Mexico last month. Nobody knows why. Brett McMurphy had the story about a month or 2-3 weeks ago. And I'm not doing my due diligence. And as I was prepping for this interview, just straight up, what do you know about this UNLV and New Mexico game that was back at the beginning of November?
Look, it's a weird situation. So here's basically what happened. In the days, hours leading up to the game, that New Mexico game against UNLV, a sports book, which was BetMGM, started noticing that they were seeing a bunch of people creating new online accounts, immediately funding those accounts to bet, let's say, unusually large amounts of money on UNLV to beat New Mexico. And this was understandably raising some questions among sportsbook officials. This was not, this was not Alabama LSU. They were playing later that day as well, a game with widespread national attention where maybe people would be interested in betting. This was UNLV and New Mexico, a game that generally is not going to get much betting activity nationally, let alone from new bettors. So BetMGM goes, this is a little weird, that we don't see anything necessarily so alarming we need to tear down the game from the board, but weird enough that we got to tell somebody about this. They then report it to U.S. Integrity, who does integrity monitoring services for just about every major U.S. sports book and many conferences and professional leagues and state government regulators as well. They send out an alert to every other sports book in America saying, hey, we got a report from BetMGM saying this is happening. Is anyone seeing anything similar? And a few sports books responded that yes, they were seeing similar activity. People creating new accounts, funding them, and betting UNLV against New Mexico. And this was after the line had moved dramatically, which was especially weird because there was no major injury or anything that should have prompted the line to move. But the line moved from UNLV being a 10-point favorite, 10.5-point favorite, even I saw in some places even as low as a 9.5-point favorite, to as high as 15.5, 16.5, even 17.5-point favorites. And it didn't stop the bets from coming in on UNLV. So it prompted this investigation to figure out why, what was happening here. Was there some manipulation going on? Could this game have been fixed? What would have caused this? And now it's been, over 6 weeks. And while there does not appear to have been any foul play, there's been no evidence that the game was, not on the up and up. Nobody actually knows what happened. And that in and of itself is a problem in this world of sort of ubiquitous, widespread gambling when something so unusual happens and no one's really able to say why. Not because something necessarily bad happened here, but because no one could say for sure that it didn't. You are on mute.
About that, I had technical difficulties on my end. $700 mixer going down the drain. When a line move, and that's a very good explanation, as I was saying that on mute. When a line moves like that over the course of the week, and you were talking about the investigation, is that? And I understand the opening of the new accounts, but since you've been covering anything, have you seen a line on like a mid-major game like that move that drastically?
Yeah, I talked to some people about that, people from some other various books in Vegas. What I was told, and I am not a gambling expert. I cover sports gambling. I'm not a gambler myself. I would not consider myself a gambling expert, but I have learned a lot in the time I've been covering this beat because it's such a fascinating area of coverage. What I have been told was that this line movement was definitely strange, very large for a game that did not, again, have any sort of injury, illness, major players sitting out, anything like that. However, not unheard of, but very strange. Among the largest line movements, if not the largest line movement of the entire college football season for a game that did not have an extenuating factor like that. Again, not like historic, not like so crazy. We've never seen this before in history, but big enough that it caught a lot of people's attention.
You just struck me with something. So it was not the biggest line movement of the week, but maybe of the season.
It was a very large line move for a game that had no sort of injury. And the thing that is interesting, and I was not able to crack this code, but I did find it. I think it's interesting to note that New Mexico's quarterback sat out the next week when he was out with what was described as strep throat for the next game the week after that game against UNLV. And there's definitely one of the questions that was raised was there any indication that he had sought treatment, had been in the hospital, had something indicated that he had been ill before this game? Because the thing is about this is that, it doesn't take much for gamblers to sort of assemble, right? Information for them is currency. And if anything, any rumor, any sort of, even if it's not true, gets sort of posted in the right corner of the internet or some group text among sharp gamblers or some handicap tout guy gets wind of something, it just sort of spreads in the wind and suddenly it becomes real, even if it's not. Now, there was no indication that this issue with the quarterback did happen that week, and he played and had a game that was in line with his typical performance for the season. Generally for him, the team was very bad that day, but not the quarterback was not the problem necessarily. But it's just, these are the kind of things that sort of go into this investigations like this. Could there have been a connection? Probably not, but it was an interesting sort of line of inquiry.
So it's very funny that you say that, because I'm backtracking in my mind, and obviously you're my guest. But to let you know, the next week they played at Boise State, and the quarterback that you're speaking about is Dylan Hopkins, who was a transfer from UAB. He started that UNLV game. Then I made the trip to Boise for that football game, and it was last minute. I was in the press box in Boise, and Boise, excuse me, and that we had found out that the freshman, his name is Devin Dampier, very talented young man, that he was making his first career start. Obviously, that's kind of a hostile environment. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was homecoming. You have struck a chord with me there. That becomes very fascinating. I bring this up. I've bet against UNM. Obviously, no. I cover the team. I've been around it, but they are just, last year they were dead last in offense, and this year their defense was horrendous. And I know I'm kind of moving, switching gears here, but in your article you had mentioned the stats from that game. This is kind of an insane question, and I appreciate the way you've answered stuff. The special teams that day was abysmal for UNM. They gave up 161 return yards, and I'm telling you, like, I was at this game, and it was like Madden or NCAA football. It was like the video game, because UNLV did what they want at will, and they were obviously a very good offense, and this was a very good year for them. But how I don't know maybe what I'm asking here, but how would somebody be able to pinpoint like something minute as special teams maybe ahead of the game? I hope you know what I'm asking. But you said, you had just previously mentioned, when sharps or bettors get any kind of information, they run with it.
Yeah, it's like, that's why these things are so hard sometimes. Like, again, there's no indication that there's anything sort of off with the game, but it's very hard sometimes to know, right? It's very hard to know. Like you said, New Mexico special teams were atrocious that day. 161 punt return yards allowed. UNLV, the entire rest of the season combined, had 160 punt return yards. They had more punt return yards in one game against New Mexico on 3 returns than they had the entire season combined. New Mexico also fumbled 4 times. They lost 2. But again, like, New Mexico wasn't good this year. Like you said, UNLV was. So how do you know? Where do you draw this line, right? So, of course, the easiest way to know is you look at the bets, the new accounts, right? They're all tied to names. You need to give a social security number to make an online betting account. So the first thing that happens in an investigation like this is, okay, is there any obvious connection between any of these people that are making these bets and the New Mexico program, right? Is it a player? Is it a player's brother? Is it someone who works for the team? Is it a coach? Is anyone that shares a last name? Whatever. There's only so far you could go with that, but that's sort of the first thing you do. Is there obviously someone involved with the program that's making these bets? In this case, no. Of course, the problem is it's not always obvious, right? Right? Like, most people who are doing something nefarious are smart enough to know, probably shouldn't use my name. So it's not always that simple. But, like I said, the investigation did not conclude that there was any person that was connected to the team that was involved in making these bets. So then, all right, so was it just poor football? And that seems to be the current sort of belief. And, the other thing about this is we have to talk about UNLV. UNLV was very good, as you said, but they also were surprisingly good, and especially so to Vegas, which is very funny because they play in Las Vegas. Maybe there's something there, don't know. But the reality is they won 10 of their 11 first games against the spread. They became a very popular team among sharp bettors. For whatever reason, throughout the season, the odds makers were behind when it came to UNLV. They were constantly wrong about UNLV, and it lasted for most of the season, which is not unheard of. Like, I've talked to people about this, and what I was told is sometimes this happens where, for whatever reason, there's a team where the handicappers are just ahead of the odds makers. And by the time it got to New Mexico, this is, one of the people I talked to, this is his belief as to what happened here. Sort of the gamblers, the sharp bettors had really coalesced around UNLV. The odds makers had sort of not quite realized it. And many sports books did say they saw, known sharps, people they know to be very educated bettors, putting money on UNLV that week. By the next week, UNLV was playing Wyoming, and it was a big correction. And suddenly every sports book was being very careful about how they were setting lines for UNLV, because they came to realize, like, hey, maybe we missed something with this team. And then UNLV ended up losing its last two games of the season, both on the field and against the spread, suggesting that maybe there was a correction and this New Mexico game might have been sort of the apex where the handicappers really had the edge over the house. And maybe it really is as simple as that. Like I said, there's some smart people I've talked to, that's just what they believe ultimately happened here.
I'm fascinated by the line jumping, and we've mentioned that, but I would have taken, UNM didn't play defense this year, and UNLV could score. Was there any indication, or anything that you came across in your research that maybe indicated that people were also betting the over heavily?
Interesting. Yeah, that did not come up, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. One thing that did come up in my reporting, basically saying that it essentially did not matter how much the line moved. People were still betting on UNLV. And that was also deemed to be interesting because, most of the time, right, sharp people that you consider to be sharp bettors, they sort of use these line movements and they bet sort of accordingly. And when they saw smart people continuing to bet on UNLV, even as the line grew, there's sort of this conventional wisdom among many sharp bettors that as the line starts growing, you bet the underdog almost sort of reflexively because, hey, someone's correcting for something. They're probably going to overcorrect. So I'm going to go the other way. That's sort of conventional wisdom among many sharp bettors. Not in this case. They continued to bet for UNLV, suggesting that for whatever reason, there was this belief that the line was just so off. Again, assuming there was no funny business going on. Again, I'm not at all suggesting there was. There was no indication there was. It's also important to point out that U.S. Integrity closed their investigation last week with not finding anything. Now, I should say that U.S. Integrity closed its investigation not necessarily satisfied with the results, meaning they still don't have an answer, but they feel like they exhausted all of their sort of investigatory capabilities. Nothing came up, closed. Now, people in that line of work don't like mysteries, right? And this one still remains a mystery, at least to some extent. But anyway, that was just an interesting nugget. It seemed like there was no line that people were not going to bet UNLV. And again, it just seems like perhaps everyone underestimated UNLV, and these sharp bettors, they're not dummies. There aren't too many of them, but if you're going to be in that world and actually making money betting on sports, you got to be, you're operating on another level than most people here.
It's hard, trust me. One of I use this example with conspiracy theories. I'm not a conspiracy theory, but I like a good conspiracy theory. To me, the moon landing. I know this isn't like the moon landing, but my example is 400,000 people worked on the lunar rover, worked on the moon landing. How it's very hard to keep something under wraps. And I thought it was interesting in your story that, and I'm quoting it here, gambling experts say overt match fixing in football is difficult because of how many people would need to be involved to truly affect the outcome of the game. And I've said that forever. I mean, just kind of in your world, and I hope this isn't a dumb question, but from what you've gathered, still at a mid-major level, how hard of a game could this have been fixed? And was maybe there was a reasoning behind it because, you mentioned that it was two, non-football schools.
Yeah, like football will be hard to fix, right? Now, I say that, of course, the easiest way to fix a football game is you get to the refs, right? That's the easiest way to fix a football game. That's a whole different conversation. You get to the refs. But in terms of like a team throwing a game, very hard because think about how many people would need to be involved, right? Even let's say the entire New Mexico punt return unit was in on some sort of fix. I'm not at all saying anything like this happened.
Right.
We are just using an example. Even if every person on the New Mexico punt return unit was in on the fix, that's not going to. The offense is still going to be trying hard. The defense is still going to be trying hard, right? Like so many people would need to be involved that would be very hard to keep it under wraps to really fix a football game. It's very different than, say, tennis, which is a notorious sport for match fixing, or boxing, of course, right? I mean, how easy is it to fix a boxing match? You just get to the fighters, they take a dive. Or, hey, you have to let this fight go at least 7 rounds before you take the guy down. Very hard to prove. Very hard. You get to a tennis player and say, you know what? Your first serve of the first set has to be a fault. And we'll pay you if you have a fault. Like, how do you prove that? Very hard. That's where you really see the problems, the bigger problems. A big team sport like football, tougher. So, again, that's just sort of another sort of data point that it's very unlikely that anything sort of nefarious was going on here just because of how hard it would be. That said, when you do talk to people about this, sports gambling was made legal by the Supreme Court in the U.S. in 2018, or the Supreme Court allowed states to start legalizing sports gambling in 2018. And look, I think ever since then, as the industry has grown and the ubiquity of sports wagering in this country has exploded, everyone's on the edge of their seat for the first huge scandal, right? We've seen some betting scandals. We saw the Alabama baseball case, for instance, where you had the Alabama baseball coach was providing inside information to a gambler. I wrote all about that a few months ago. Or with the situation with Iowa, or the hockey player that was suspended half the season, or what. We've seen some. We haven't seen the big one. And the people I talk to say pretty consistently that the most likely place we see the big one is in college sports. And probably some sort of lower level, more like a mid-major college sports. And the reason for that is the financial incentive is just much stronger for players to get involved in something they shouldn't be, right? You're a professional athlete in a major North American sports league. The minimum salary is $1 million. The average salary could be $4 or $5 million. You'd have to be in some pretty big trouble to get involved with anything like that when you're risking millions, right? But if you're a college football player at some school in the Mountain West, right, and you're not going to the NFL, you're not, making big NIL money if you're the offensive guard on whatever state, there's vulnerabilities there potentially, especially given the ubiquity of sports gambling on college campuses, right? We've seen study after study by the NCAA and others saying that sports wagering on college campuses and among college athletes is rampant, right? And all it would take is a couple athletes getting in over their heads, having the right, have the wrong person sort of get in their ear. Now, it hasn't happened yet, and the NCAA is working very hard to ensure it doesn't. But I do know that is like the concern, that there seems to be a lot more vulnerability in college sports than the pro ranks, just because of this sort of financial incentive, or sort of the lack of financial incentive since players aren't getting paid.
That was a very good answer. And I had thought of 2 other questions and you answered it in that second part. Thank you very much for that. My next question to you is, I understand, everything is on the internet today, but how did this story catch? Obviously, I know this is what you do as a beat and for a job, but how did you learn about this investigation, and what was your first thought when you saw it and you delved into it?
Yeah, good question. I can't go too deep into answering that. I'm sure you can understand why.
I can.
I cover sports gambling. I do these stories. I I'm fortunate enough in the time I've been on this beat to have built up a good, Rolodex of sources, and I get who are kind enough to give me some tips when something interesting comes across their radar, and it's worth sort of keeping in mind uh, that these sort of alerts. Let's say hypothetically, someone like U.S. Integrity puts out an alert, as they did in this case, right? An alert like that's going to go to like literally every major sports book in America, right? So a lot of people then have access to it. So once something is out there that much, enough people know about it. Fortunately, usually someone who I know is willing to give me a call. So yeah, someone just I got a call saying, hey, this came across my desk. I think it's interesting. You should look into it, and then I go off and do my job. Sorry, I can't be more specific than that.
No. I know.
You understand.
I know better than asking that. I think has
But
this
that's
been
basically how it works. I have people that fortunately are looking out, know I'm interested in stuff like this. I can tell you I have another one in the works right now. I can't say anything about it other than it's one that will probably have a much more satisfying resolution than this football game, which is I feel like is a bit unsatisfying due to the lack of a clear answer.
I I appreciate that answer, and I know better asking that question. I thought maybe you gave the correct answer, and I wasn't trying to put you on the spot there. I hope you can understand that.
No, it's fine. I also wasn't thrilled when Brett McMurphy put out that story because I thought I was ahead of him, and then I had a very bad morning when I woke up one morning and saw that he had blown my spot. But that's because Brett is a great reporter, and it turned out I didn't have a chance. But hopefully, I was able to move the ball forward, to use a football metaphor, a little bit.
No. It was very good. My next question to you is, and this will be one of the last ones I get to you, and I've appreciated your time again joining us. Jared Diamond from the Wall Street Journal, he had a story on the UNM and UNLV game that is, since Brett McMurphy broke it on December 6th, it kind of it hit home here. And the reason I'm again incredibly grateful for you to join me is I felt like this kind of flew under the radar because we had issues with New Mexico State. New Mexico State was just here in the bowl game. I'd mentioned, I think I'd asked you before we got on, hit and record, if you were aware of it. And so there's been some funny stuff within UNM football. But I ask you this, kind of just your opinion, what in statements that were released, not only by U.S. Integrity, I understand that they weren't happy with the results, but the statements that you got or saw from UNM and athletic director Eddie Nunez, did you just feel kind of like this is blah, or did it give you anything that maybe, scratched your head a little bit more?
It wasn't, it was a standard sort of milk toast statement. But look, like they believe that is New Mexico's position. And again, I have no reason to say this isn't true, is that, whatever happened, the gambling market happened, but it was not because they, were in on anything, or there was, again, anything happened on the field. And that's all that New Mexico cares about, right? All UNM did care about is, is there any chance that there was some sort of fix-in? And they don't believe there was. And that seems, again, no one else seems to think there was either. And at that point, it's like, okay, whatever happened out there in the gambling world, that's not they don't care. Not their purview. They're not interested. As long as nothing sort of happened with their players and their team, they're satisfied. And, obviously it was a rough season for them. This was just like another wrinkle in a bad season, obviously resulted in the coach being fired. And, I think it's just been a rough go for the program. And I'm sure they don't love this kind of attention coming on them. They had enough negative attention coming just from the poor performance on the field. And this obviously doesn't, it doesn't look good for New Mexico, even though, like, again, there's no evidence they probably nothing bad happened seemingly, but it's obviously the kind of thing they don't want out there about their program,
No, I appreciate that answer. Over the holidays and heading into the new year, making time for me on a weekday night, much appreciated. He is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, sports reporter. And as you heard him say, he mentioned covering the enterprise and kind of the sports gambling of the sports world now. And I thought that was very fascinating. Again, if you're a big baseball guy like I am, check out his book, Swing Kings, The Inside Story of the Baseball Home Run Revolution. I'm sure you can find that anywhere that books are sold. Very quickly, how did you end up writing a story about the revolution of the home run?
Yes, interesting. That originated with a story I wrote in the journal. Oh God, when did I even write that story? I wrote a story in the journal about. I wrote a story in the journal about in 2017 about a bunch of ball players who I had come to realize that my reporting had all remade their swings and remade their careers with the assistance of let's call them unusual, obscure hitting gurus from the internet who never played baseball at a high level themselves. And I found this to be very fascinating. Like, how could there be hitting coaches working with major league players that are like outside of the system, never played beyond high school baseball? What could they possibly teach major league players, let alone literally remake their careers? Guys like JD Martinez and Justin Turner and others. And wrote a story about this in 2017, got some attention, and the right people saw it and got some calls, and people thought, there might be. Someone gave me a call. Do you ever think there's a whole book here? And I said, I hadn't thought about it, but I'm willing to take this meeting. And I met with the woman who's now my agent, and she presented this incredible vision she had, how this article could turn into a book. And I was so inspired after the conversation. I said, all right, let's do it. And, then in 2018, we decided when the book was going to come out, and we decided it was going to come out on March 30th, 2020, which seemed like a great day for a book to come out in 2018. Didn't quite work out that way, but fortunately, despite everything, despite all of my signings and parties and TV events all being canceled because we were all sitting at home, quarantining, fortunately, it found an audience anyway. And I'm very grateful that 3 years later, almost 4 years later now, people are still are talking about it, and people are still reading it. And yeah, it's available. You could still probably find it on shelves in major bookstores in some places probably, and of course anywhere online as well. It's still in print everywhere. So give it a look if you haven't read it.
I am definitely going to check it out. We had Jeff Pearlman on this podcast. I was lucky enough, so I will add your book right when I get off from here. It will be being shipped to my house, and then I will add it to the collection. His name is Jared Diamond, again, a sports reporter for the Wall Street Journal. I cannot stress this enough. I appreciate your time during the holidays and on a weekday night to join me to answer my stupid questions on what seems to be a black hole of UNM football, which I'm sure this wasn't on your bingo card today to show up on an Albuquerque podcast. But Jared Diamond, thank you very much. Hey, happy holidays and happy New Year.
You got it, guys. Thanks a lot.